Jackie, thank you so much for joining me. We've been talking about calendar scheduling reminders and how they are not invaluable. But you're here because we've been wanting to talk for a while and schedule this, and finally the stars are aligned and we can be here today. So thanks for coming on this morning to chat.
Thank you for having me. I really love your show and I'm so glad to be here.
Well, thank you. I know, and I don't know when or how we first connected, but we
Oh, it was
finally
because of Womp Womp to Wow. I had
that's right.
recommended one of my clients to take
And I
yours.
was like, who is this amazing human? And then we connected several times, and we always have good conversations, and your emails are awesome. I love reading your
Oh,
emails.
thank you. I love your emails too.
This is a great love fest. We need to hang out more often.
Oh, love
So, and so tell me, you serve the coaching community, right?
I do serve the coaching community, online course creators, service providers / agency owners creating an educational platform. So the way that I even got started, it was not necessarily because I was like, oh, I want to serve course creators, but it was more so like I was in a position where I knew I wanted to be working full time for myself. And I was also exploring a path to be a therapist part time. And I was basically using social media to do two things: connect with therapists to learn more about the profession, and then also uh, get clients basically on social media, because it was the height of the pandemic. And just so happened that one of my first clients was a therapist and she was a course creator. And she was like, oh, you look like you can help me with my course. Can you help me write these emails? And I had already at that time created things like a lead magnet. I had taken copy courses already. And I was like, yeah. And by the way, I'm a grad student in your niche. And she really loved that. And I just really loved continuing to serve that professional who is really trying to make a presence for themselves, or a diversified income stream for themselves online. So yeah, that is my favorite person to serve.
Fantastic. Well, I and you attract the most amazing people. Like they're just the people that we have in common. I have loved those conversations as well. They just seem to be amazing, amazing people who are doing really cool things in the world, which is exciting to see. But you have a different approach than a lot of people, and you do a lot of is it brand voice or brand messaging work that you're prioritizing?
Both. Yeah. So, and it depends on what stage of business that they're at, right? So like if a business is still trying to figure out what their messaging should be, or maybe like they have been in business or they're refining a new direction and they're not quite sure about their internal process to collect voice of customer data and infuse their own brand stories within that, I like to find the harmony between what is the customer saying, what's the hierarchy of messages that is most important to prioritize to really speak directly to that perfect fit person, and then how can we weave in, and honor the founder's personality, the brand personality, the brand stories that will speak to that new person. And so when we get to, if I'm working with a more established business that, they're very, very clear on what their mission, values, vision is. And now they're like struggling to, not just write their own, they're no longer struggling to write their own stuff, and they have a very clear style. That's where, at that point, that's where the business owner and I will work on something else, and we'll talk about how does their team need to understand the nuances of their brand voice. And so again, just depending on what stage of business that the person is at, messaging definitely comes first. And once that's really honed in and that's proven, they have a value ladder, then we can talk about the really clear things that a company should have, in my opinion, when it comes to if they're hiring on an employee that is in sales and marketing, or maybe they have like 2 to 3 or 4 writers, right? I'm in a couple of circles where business owners have like, they're like growing like multiple brands at a time. And so it's like often their employees, if they're writing for all of these different brands, but then the founder is taking care of still, one brand, it's like, okay, well, how can you let go, and how can we make sure we're teaching your team in a systematic way so that everyone's on the same page? Because it can get, if there's not a proper training internally, then that's where things can get a little disorganized. But I love organization, so that's at a high level.
Well, and I think that's something that people don't realize, how hard it is to get someone to follow your voice. And you and I have, we both have processes for doing it, but we know what to listen for. And a lot of times, if you're coming into a company, you probably have a style of your own, and it's very, very hard to adopt that, and or rather to let go of that. And so part of what I know we talked about before is letting go. And can you touch on what those lessons are sometimes like? Because that's hard.
Yeah.
Really go.
Well, so, and I just want to speak to different stages of business too. So like for my business, for example, in the first probably, like a year into the business, I was booked. I had gotten like tons of referrals. And at that point, I was having someone, a client facing assistant, communicate to clients with me or for me if I couldn't get back as quickly as I wanted to. And unfortunately, there was a situation where the assistant had said something that was very off brand, and it had ended up triggering the client in a way that was like real, like you just couldn't come back from it. And I just was like, I felt so awful. And that was honestly like the moment in my business where I was like, I have to create something better than what I have now for myself. And so that was where I was like, okay, how do I step up, and how can I be a leader in this so that my company, no matter who is working with me, people sometimes they decide to change positions, or like they, people come in and out. There's never going to be someone like in your business, like 100, like the whole time besides you, right? So it's like, it just makes sense for you to have an internal company resource that has your brand voice documented. And so, I know that a lot of people, even if you're like many years into, maybe even like I've met business owners who are like, they're 5 years in and they don't quite yet know what an internal, or they don't have, if you don't go through a program to build something like that, or if you don't like work with a consultant who can create it for you, that's a sort of thing where you're like, it's only until you are very like, until problems come up and you're like, yep, we need something better.
Yeah, it's that reactive mode. Reactive mode is hard.
Yeah, and it's hard. And so it's so important now to like hear stories like this, so that, if you are trying to hire more than one writer on your team, whether that's, social media or copy or anything else, right? Or a contractor,
communications,
prepare really well, right? Like, and you think about, if you were in corporate, or if you had a 9-to-5 job before that, like every employee goes through a very clear like onboarding period, whether that's like a week, 2 weeks, 3 months, whatever length it is. And to have included in there something specific for the writer, right? And so, for me, and like the first mindset shift, right, is like, okay, yes, I can let go of control when I have an organized method to the madness, right? And so what part of that organization includes things like knowing how to give really good and specific feedback. So I will also say my mother was
very hard.
It is hard.
People are intrinsically good at it. And other people like Erin Pennings just are like, I'm just going to change this one word, and pretty soon, like, I should not do it. Because
that's so funny. Yeah, and there's no shame here at all, of course. And I mean, I literally am the daughter of an English teacher. Like, this is literally what I grew up like. I graded papers for my mom, you know what I mean? So it's like, this is a sort of thing where it's like, it just naturally makes sense why this is something I like to do. I was a teacher in my former career. So it's like, I put my teacher hat on and it's like, imagine me with my red pen. Not really, but like, that's a sort of
purple. It's purple.
yeah. Well, like the more, and just having like seen so many like students on the receiving end, right? Like not even talking about business and employees, but like from a teaching perspective, very objectively, the more specific that you can get with someone on their work, the easier it is and the faster they'll be able to learn something. So like, yes, it is intuitive. There are parts of brand voice that are intuitive, but you can actually get very specific and measurable, which takes me into, okay, how do we get like more specific? What are some examples of things that you can say, so that you're not, and the benefit here, right, is like, you don't have to spend as much time repeating yourself, right? You can come up with an internal language for, this is how I'm going to give you feedback, and this is how I'm going to assess that this person is going to take that in and like not make the same mistake again, or not necessarily like, okay, I'm going to slap you on the hand if you make the same mistake again. But just as it's something that people have to learn to get clear about. So the way that I like to think about brand voice, especially if I'm assessing someone, right? Whether that's a social media manager or whether that's a client-facing assistant. I haven't hired my own copywriter yet, but that's where I have 4 things in mind. So you can just remember the STAR framework, easy to remember. So STAR stands for sayings, tone, articulation, and rhythm. I'm going to break down all 4 of those to make it super, super easy. So sayings, this is very simple as far as phraseology, actual vocabulary, and terminology that is unique to your brand. That's the easiest one to take place. And you can even break things down as nitty gritty as like, okay, do I use these types of nouns, these verbs, these adjectives? And then for tone, this is where things start to get a little bit more, you can be measurable about tone. There are some free tone analyzer tools out there, but that's where we can get extremely nuanced and specific with our team members as far as like, okay, when I'm talking about my expertise, this is the tone that I like to convey. Or if you're a product-based brand, right? Even if you're not in the course creation niche, if you are an e-commerce business, right? How does a tone change when you're talking about your customers, or if you're talking about how the product was made or how the product is delivered? I have this blog that I wrote on Liquid Death. Do you know who that or do you know what that brand is?
It sounds familiar, but I am drawing a total blank. Now I'm going to look it up.
Fun. It's so fun. Their brand is, they have like such a cult.
Oh, the water company. The water company.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. Yes.
Yes.
And it, like, if you study their FAQ page and the way that their tone shifts when they talk about different things, there's a clear difference. Like, they use a lot of humor in what they talk about, but then when they talk about how the product is made and the ingredients and things like that, their tone very deliberately shifts, because they're like, okay, now we're going to stop having fun. And now we're going to talk about like, this is like, they're going to straighten up their collar and like put on their expert hat on. Right. And that's where
we're leaving happy hour and getting
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Oh, hello, Kitty.
this is Mac. He only comes to see me when I'm talking to people.
So that's a super important thing to distinguish, right? Because if your brand is like, I have a friend who is like, I don't want to be the expert. And, that's the brand that she's chosen. And so, that's where we have to have these conversations in terms of like, if where are you showing up as an expert, or where are you showing up as more playful, or are you self-deprecating in some ways? You know what I mean? But then that's where things get to be very nuanced. Now, articulation is where the very like technical things come into play, like punctuation and emoji usage, and when is an emoji inappropriate or out of context to use, right? And then rhythm is essentially how fast or how slow or / how long or short your phrases are. And again, that can change on context. So that was a lot, but hopefully it was a really good overview with examples. The STAR framework is a very good measurable approach to and helps you be very specific with people, whether you are hiring a writer or if you're even just assessing yourself. So
I'm trying to get consistent because I think consistency is hard as well. And so I have a question for you because I think this ties right into your last discussion. Is humor. How do you communicate humor to your writers? Because everyone has such a different sense of humor. And it's like we get a little silly in my brand and a little tongue in cheek sometimes, but
yeah,
it's never snarky. And
it's
it's
never
always
what was the last
never
thing?
snarky. It's never meant to be condescending. It's always meant to be lighthearted. And it's a fine line. It's a really fine line. So that's where I've had some challenges in the past with communicating that to writers. It's like you can have fun, but you can't talk down to people.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so have you handled this before? I'm
I
super
love
curious.
that question. I love that question. And this is where we can get, again, I like to put my teacher hat on just because it is a teaching moment for whoever you are hiring in your business. And I'll give you an example too. So when I was trying to hire a social media manager in my business, I did all the thing what I thought was all the things right. I had taken this operations program and like I wrote the test project, I wrote the application, I paid the person for the test project, and but that the operations program didn't teach about brand voice and the nuances of brand voice. And then when I received something back, and the person was trying to be she is a lot more of her writing style had a much more upbeat and like sunshiny tone to it. Not that I'm not sunshiny, but there's just like shades of
Right. It's like it's a blend of matter of fact. It's like you're very matter of fact, but like,
right.
let's have a glass half full.
Yeah. So then I like, as I was trying to figure out like why was this person not nailing the tone that I actually wanted to convey, that was where I was like, okay, I started to create a table on my Google Docs. I don't know if you can just like imagine a table on Google Docs where I'm just objectively listing out, here are all the things that I see, and I'm literally explaining like based on each like linguistic element. I'm like, this is why this is not correct, and this is why like this is off to me, and it's very nuanced, right? So it's just a matter of like if you're really wanting to not like repeat yourself, or if you really want to make sure that someone is clear, having your brain on paper and sharing why something specific is incorrect. And so I would say if you can have as many examples of as possible, and like rewrites, right? If you were to rewrite somebody's humor, how would you rewrite it? And then having multiple examples for people. I find if someone gets a lot of examples for something, in addition to the direction and the context, that is such a game changer for people. I've not necessarily like when it comes to, I mean, humor for sure. Like there are people who teach like courses on like writing to be funnier. I am not one of those people that
I'm not either. No.
I will like find those people and have them be guests in my programs. But yeah, it's the sort of thing where it's like sometimes, and this is where people have to make a decision, where if you're just like, yeah, if this person just does not get it, or like, then that's just a sign for you to be like, okay, I'm going to make the executive decision, and I'm going to say this person is probably better to write this other thing, or maybe I can hire them for a different type of project, but at least for this particular topic or whatever. If this blog, right? If I want to have a little bit more of humor inserted there, then, you can make this decision of either not to work with them or give them a company, purchase a company resource and have them go through that. But that's a really great question, honestly.
Humor's hard. Humor's very, very hard.
Yes.
So, yeah. Oh, I love it. I love hearing your perspective on things. I think it's so cool. And you've put so much time into developing the framework because it is hard to make it that simple.
Yeah.
It's insanely hard.
Took
Um,
a long time to come up with.
and you say the 4 things, and it's like, oh, that makes so much sense. And it feels obvious because you've made it so simple, but it's nothing like that on the other side.
Yeah,
So,
humor can be certainly like a whole like section in someone's like brand voice guide for sure. Like
yeah.
if we think about like when, because that's the sort of thing that like if you get it wrong and you hit send on it, like the Kate Spade like event, like people
Yeah.
think, or like whoever wrote it, I'm sure they were trying to come up with something like lighthearted, but like that
It
can,
landed really, really flat.
it's extreme, right? That's the extreme example of like this is what happens when you're not clear on right the nuances of your humor and the brand's humor. And if someone, you know, whoever was the last person to decide, you know, that was the like that fit quality control, right? Then
Yeah,
it's
that
like,
would be a good time to approach them with like, "Hey, how about a brand?"
hey. Yeah,
If
I
that was your target audience, which I'm not so sure that Kate Spade is.
yeah.
Um, Mine either. So you have some cool resources though to help people break down their brand voice guide, and you teach workshops on this too, right?
Yeah. So my brand voice freebie, it's at jackiesunga.co/brand dash voice.
And that is in the description here, so people should see that.
Yay. This is for you if you're ready to go beyond your mission, right? If you're like you're clear on what your mission is, you're clear on what your values are, and you really and you know you want to go beyond like here are all the emojis that I use, right? That's like step one. Now the second step, or like the way to take it further and get a little bit more nuanced, is to start to figure out what is your writing style and to get as objective and measurable as possible. Because when you have something, it's okay to be subjective, right? But if you want to get when you introduce a measurable approach to your writing style and use tools as I have in my free guide, then that just cuts down the conversation time that you have with a team member. That reduces the amount of back and forth conversation, because you're like, okay, here's where my joy level is at and here's where yours is at, right? I would like the level of joy in this content to be at this level. Can you change it and make sure that that reflects the number in the tone analyzer, right? So that's it. It doesn't have to be as like emotional. I think a lot of people can get very like heavily emotional about like, oh man, like this is so bad, or like this is so far from what I wanted. But like you actually can like let go of that, let go of that fear and actually communicate in a very objective way. It doesn't mean they have to be boring about it, you know what I mean? But it's just that like
This
nobody's
is
feelings
this,
have to
yeah.
get hurt. Sorry, say it
Right.
again.
I was like, this is this. Yeah, it's never a criticism, or it
Right,
shouldn't
right.
be.
Just
Yeah, it's a
very
learning
objective.
opportunity.
Yes, exactly. A learning opportunity. So that is the free resource. And then for anyone who wants to take it a step further, I do have a live workshop series. I love teaching live, honestly, just because that gives people the opportunity to ask questions, get feedback. And one of my favorite exercises in my workshop series, I just wrapped it up. It just ended about two weeks ago. My favorite exercise was where I literally asked the participants to write each other's content for them. And right after that, they had to give each other feedback. So it was a matter of like, in a way, acting live and getting good feedback from each other live. That's another reason why it's delivered live. So that like that learning can happen in real time, as opposed to like me talking at them and then like them being like, oh yeah, but then like them actually working on it as if we're in a classroom and they're working with people and they're solidifying their learning in that way. So
And I think there's something to that, instantly integrating the information.
yes.
And when it's actionable and when it's implementable,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, and that's when the light bulbs go off. And it's really fun to see.
Mhm.
Um, I love the same thing. I love to teach live, and it's really energetic. It's fun you get to capitalize on the energy in the room too.
It is. I love it so much. There's like, and that's also like if you use it as an educator, excuse me, you as an educator are like, oh, like I can explain this a little bit more. I can explain this in a different way, right? And when you hear those very specific examples from people or questions from people, or you hone in on like, where is this one person, not understanding something, that's one of the benefits of live instruction, of just like, you can really, really get like as customized as you can instruction based on like whoever is in the workshop at that time. So anyways, so those are the two things that I have as far as group or brand messaging and brand voice. In the workshop series, we go over both messaging and voice. So that, internally people can start to have their own process to understanding how to analyze their own style and voice, but also how to give feedback to someone else. So yeah, those are the two things I've got going on.
Awesome. Well, and I can tell everyone, like, I will personally vouch that this is an amazing guide because I downloaded it.
Oh, you did.
Yeah. When did I do that? It's been a while. I think that's how I got in your mailing list. So it's so good. It's so good. But I just realized we've been talking for half an hour already. I don't know how that happened. Like, it feels like it's been 5 minutes. So thank you very much for joining me. It's been fun, and we'll have to do this again soon. Once we solve the scheduling demons things. So thank you.
Thank you, Erin. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Likewise. And just one final note, all of the resources that Jackie just named are in the notes here. So you'll be able to download them right from wherever you're watching this video, whether it's YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook.
Woohoo! Yay!
Woohoo.